Good morning and welcome to Scotland Speaks at our usual time of 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning. In last week's show we covered the fact that Scotland's wealth is being squandered, and I interviewed Jim Eadie, former Member of the Scottish Parliament for Edinburgh South. Let's hear some of what Jim Eadie had to say.
That we need to have control over our massive energy resources in Scotland. There's the old adage that if fool me once, shame on you; fool me twice, shame on me. We cannot allow the mistakes of the 70s, where £60 billion of tax revenues poured into the UK Treasury from North Sea oil over the period that Thatcher was the Prime Minister. Now, in current prices, that would be in excess of £200 billion. That money was lost to Scotland when it could have been invested in our public services, it could have been invested in improving infrastructure in Scotland, and it could have been invested in tackling poverty and inequality and creating the kind of society that we want to see. So we can't repeat that mistake again, and we can't see the renewable energy bounty that lies off our shores being squandered in the way that our oil revenues were by Westminster. And we know that between now and 2030, 124 billion kilowatt hours of energy, that's enough to power Scotland's homes 12.5 times over, will leave Scotland with no corresponding benefit, either in terms of tax revenues or in terms of jobs, direct jobs or supply chain jobs coming to Scotland. Now, independence is the answer to all of that, and we have to talk about independence, of course, and about how we achieve that, about how we prioritise that, but we need to link independence back to the social and economic situation that Scotland finds itself in.
We are focusing on the important 2026 elections and how to properly use your list vote to maximise independence supporting MSPs. Let's take a look at that film.
Here's how the Scottish elections work in 2 minutes. Scotland is split up into 8 regions. Each region has around 9 local constituency MSPs that you vote for using your lilac-coloured ballot paper. This vote is simple. The candidate with the highest vote in each constituency wins the seat. Each region then has to elect another 7 MSPs on what's called the regional list. These 7 are elected using your peach-coloured ballot paper. Here you vote for one party. Each party's votes are counted up, and then they are divided by the number of seats that party has already won, plus 1. For example, in 2021, the SNP won 9 constituency seats in the North East. The 148,000 votes they got on the regional list were divided by 10, giving them just under 15,000 votes. The other 133,000 votes were wasted. This meant the SNP did not win a single seat on the regional list in the North East of Scotland. Despite getting the most votes in every region, the SNP only won 2 of 56 regional list seats up for grabs, with unionist parties picking up 46 of them. If, however, SNP voters had decided to back ALBA on the regional list instead, the 46 seats won by unionist parties would have been cut to 24. The SNP would have sacrificed just 2 single seats, and in return, the second largest party would have been the pro-independence ALBA party with 30 seats. It would have been an independence supermajority in the Scottish Parliament. In 2026, don't waste your vote. Vote ALBA on the regional list.
To this week's show, and I'm in London having spoken at a conference on the importance of women in sport. And in that vein, we thought it would be a good idea to bring you some excellent speeches from the wonderful women in ALBA from our conference in Edinburgh just a short while ago. So I'm going to pass you over to the women, and next week we'll bring you something from our National Council taking place tomorrow in Stirling. Over to the women.
There's a tremendous amount of interest, and has always been a tremendous amount of interest in independence. One of the things I learned in 2014 is that there are thousands of people out there, progressive people, people who are not there in parties, who have never joined a party, and who are giving it everything they've got, who gave it everything they had during 2014. So I want to see us giving support to all the strands for Indie, including Salvo and Liberation. I don't come from a parliamentary party tradition. I'm a communist. I've been a communist all my life. And we only ever fought for liberation movements. We were only ever really part of liberation movements. We did put up a few candidates who always got very tiny percentages of the vote, but we mostly, there was no expectation about parliamentary parties bringing liberation. So I think it's really important that we do not seem aloof to the independence movement. The SNP was constantly, the leadership was constantly aloof to the independence movement. And I think it's really important that we are not doing that.
Conference. This topical motion encompasses exactly what ALBA stands for: independence. It is in line with everything the party has done to advance the cause of Scottish independence. We've put out olive branches to other independent supporting parties in 2021 and 2024. We've held national assemblies and other events open to all independent supporters, not just ALBA members. We've invited other independence leaders to speak at conferences, such as Colette Walker from ISP and Sarah Salyers from Salvo. ALBA recognise that independence is not something we can do or should do alone. As Angus said today in the motion on independence, the evidence of the last decade shows that the SNP cannot achieve independence on their own. The SNP need ALBA in the next Parliament, just as ALBA needs the support across the independence movement. Members, this conference is a difficult one for many of us. It is ALBA's first conference without Alex Salmond, and this is the first conference I've ever attended without Uncle Alec. And not seeing him sat at that table just feels like something's missing. And many of you have already said to me today, it just doesn't quite feel the same. But as he would always remind us, the golden strand of Scottish sovereignty since before the declaration of Arbroath, as well as democratic action, we must support all civil action for our nation's sovereignty. But conference, in the future, we have firsts that we can look forward to. We can look forward to our first ALBA MSPs elected at the Scottish Parliament next year. And as this motion sets out, by working with all parties and groups, I know that in the near future, each of us will be able to say, for the first time, we live in the independent nation of Scotland. Thank you. Well done, Tina.
Okay, so when we were first looking at this motion, we were thinking, between myself and Suzanne Blackley, about the language we use when talking about benefits. So we were starting to pick up on a real narrative around skivers and strivers in the media and from politicians. There was a lot of implications that people claiming benefits were somehow frauds or exaggerating. It comes through quite a lot on mental health. We're seeing it this week, for example, with the anxiety topic coming up in Parliament, but it's everywhere. I wasn't expecting that by the time this motion came up, it would be so topical. I didn't think we'd have a Labour Chancellor trying to balance the budget by going after the poorest and the most vulnerable in society, and particularly not by going after PIP, which has got about the lowest fraud rate there is for a benefit. Because it's so hard to get, you've got to be quite ill to get that in the first place. So the motion itself is looking at the language on this question. So I'm asking conference to note, with regret, the negative portrayal that's happening at the moment of benefits claimants as somehow lazy, scrounging or fraudulent, and the harm that that demonisation has on mental and physical well-being of people who are currently claiming benefits. It's increasing exclusion from society, and it pushes you further away from recovery and further away from being an active citizen. I'm asking conference to assert that social security is a hallmark of a decent society, and it's a basic human right.
Take all the time you need.
First of all, I want to say that the reason I first came into supporting independence was because at the time I was working in health and benefits, and it struck me as bizarre and crazy that these two things are not only not joined up, but not even run by the same governments in Scotland. And to me, health and welfare are part of the same system. And working in the Citizens Advice Bureau at the time, some of the cases I saw around 2010, which was the last benefit reform, were horrific, truly horrific. And these are people who are sometimes at the very worst, most stressful, awful time in their lives. And they're being made to feel awful. What I actually wanted to add here was something that I don't hear spoken about very often in terms of what the Labour government are doing now, which is the connection between welfare, particularly health welfare, and the pension and retirement age. When I started work, women retired at 60 and men at 65. That is now up to 68. We have people in the most physically demanding jobs very often start work at 16. And these are jobs like maybe carers, porters, builders, cleaners, the kind of jobs where your body actually does get quite worn out. You can't physically do those jobs until you're 68. Plus, people who started work at 16, by the time they're 56, they've paid 40 years of national insurance. Once they get to a point where they're maybe too sick to work and they can't do it any longer, they now enter this system, which they've paid for, which is just a punishment. It's no longer there to help them. It just acts as a kind of Kafkaesque system which is designed to denigrate and to punish. And I just think it's appalling. And the kind of language that we're getting, it's been demonising people for years and years now. But the people they're demonising, apart from, I mean, it is the sick and disabled, but it's also people who've worked for 40 years. And this idea that people are scroungers is just something I find absolutely disgusting. So I would absolutely say support this motion, and we all need to be challenging that narrative everywhere it's found, because it's becoming just far too widespread.
Great stuff. Thank you.
Conference. Behind issues of immigration currently attracting so much public attention, polarising opinion all over Europe and much of the developed world, are demographic time bombs. National populations with an ageing profile, born increasingly not from improved life expectancy, in some cases life expectancy is stagnating, but from below replacement rate fertility. Young adults are having fewer and in many cases no children. While the Global South has seen population growth cause headaches for national governments, countries such as ours have seen 50 years in which populations have required immigration to grow and increasingly simply to avoid decline. This awkward fact, not merely the attractiveness of a supply of low-wage workers, has wedded some democratic governments to high levels of unmanaged or indiscriminate immigration, even when the cost to themselves has been the loss of support from the indigenous voting populations they rely on to stay in power. Over a decade ago, the Scottish Government sought to find out how Scandinavian countries were bucking this trend. The baby box was intended to copy a Finnish programme of parenting classes, healthcare, parental leave, social and practical support. A policy in the event stripped of its power to change the landscape for would-be parents, considering whether and when to start family. Now, Scandinavian countries too have low fertility. The traditional wisdom that only a shortage of houses, money and flexible employment are deterring people from starting or growing their families no longer holds.
I wanted to speak particularly about my time on a remote island in the Orkneys. Any here from the Orkneys? Well, there should be. I must do something about that. I went there into the completely unknown. I was the so-called head teacher. Read for that general dog's body, because there was no one else but me in charge of 12 children, age 5 through to secondary school. Now, there is no school the population has gone from 49 down to 17. I returned to the island and I nearly greet. It is awful. There are farms with livable inn houses, but there's no school, so young people are not attracted to the island because they have to send their preschool, by the way, to the next island. If it's blowing any harder than a force 6 from the northwest, they don't get to school. Now, I know parents can educate their children. I know we've got the internet. I'm a technophobe, of course, but they miss out on the social aspect. The vibrancy has gone where I did organise every fortnight something in the school which is attached to the former school, which was attached to my lovely wee cottage. And we all got together. It had to be a Friday or a Saturday evening. The grown-ups socialised. I sort of come up with some ideas, some a bit batty, as you would expect, but all fun and getting together and having the children catered for on site. Now, what we have is, but to repopulate those places needs money, of course. To actually, could I specify the cost of everything? Even if I was getting a box out from the Orkney Mainland, it cost me £3. I was in a privileged position of being well paid, but think what the farmers even had to pay for the supplementary food stuff, what they had to pay if they couldn't deal with an awkward calving. They had to pay extra for getting everything done. So there are lots of things to consider. It's not just snap your fingers and say, hey, we're going to dump people there. You've got to reintroduce a reasonable structure to support it.
Water is life, but not all water is equal. Our water ionizer restructures and alkalizes water for optimum hydration and detoxification, recreating the planet's ultimate water sources, found in lightning-struck lakes and newly melted icebergs. H2 Pure Source. Change your water. Change your life.
I want to share my own experience of home birth, not to say that it's the right choice for everyone, but to say that it should be a choice. And right now, too many expectant parents are not given the information they need to make that choice for themselves. When I gave birth at home to my second child, I was surrounded by my family. The atmosphere was calm, familiar and reassuring. My son Ronnie was even in the birthing pool with me at the beginning, and he was there immediately after his sister was born, welcoming her in a way that just wouldn't have been possible in a hospital setting. There was no rush, no unnecessary clinical interventions, just trust, support and the knowledge that I was in control of my own experience. I believe that being in a relaxed, non-clinical environment helped my recovery. Without the stress and interruptions of a hospital settings, I was able to rest, bond with my baby and heal more naturally. I even managed to get my favourite takeaway delivered without leaving the comfort of my own home. Yet despite these many benefits like personalised care from midwives, less intervention and a more positive birth experience, home birth remains underutilised due to lack of awareness, societal misconceptions and limited support. Home birth is not about taking risks. Every pregnancy has a detailed care plan, and at the slightest hint of anything being wrong, my local authority assured me that an ambulance would be deployed to sit outside my home, ready to take action if needed. Safety is always the priority.
To be honest, when Shannon first told me she wanted a home birth, I was absolutely terrified. Like many parents, my first instinct was to worry. I had grown up believing that hospital births were the safest and the only sensible option. The thought of my daughter giving birth at home filled me with anxiety. But as parents do, I put my own fear aside and supported her decision, and as she had done the research and knew the risks and the benefits, and she was confident in her choice. And now, having witnessed that experience firsthand, I am fully committed to the idea of home births. Because what I saw that day was nothing short of incredible. It wasn't clinical, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't impersonal. As Shannon said, it was calm, it was intimate, and it was beautiful. Shannon was surrounded by the people who loved her in an environment where she felt safe and in control. No bright lights, no intrusive machines, just the quiet reassurance, her favourite aromatherapy, her music, and that steady presence of her midwife. The natural rhythm of home birth unfolding as it was meant to. And when Miss Cora Cullen entered the world, it was into warmth and love, not into a cold, sterile hospital room. It was without doubt one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. And I've no doubt that my daughter's recovery was helped by the fact that she was able to rest and heal in her own home, with her newborn in her arms, and without that disruption of hospital routines. What's more, as an added benefit of home birth, there was one that not many people think about, and as somebody who has researched their family tree extensively, her birth certificate now says that she was born at her home address. That's something special. A little piece of history tied to where she took her first breath.
But yeah, I've had home births, so I thought I should definitely speak on this. And anyone that's sort of spoken about birth stories or often can be traumatising, like we have heard, but I certainly have had personal experience of very positive home birth experiences. My youngest son was born at home, and what the previous speaker spoke of is certainly true in terms of having that positive experience of being in our own home, the midwife coming out, and at the later stages a second midwife, being there, it was such a more positive experience than the experience in hospital. There's certainly many women I've spoken to that have had very traumatic experiences in hospital, in postnatal wards, and certainly in terms of the impacts of on the siblings who were then able to come and meet their baby brother just after he was born was such a wonderful experience and really cemented their bonds, and it was a lovely, beautiful family experience that we were all able to then be in our own rooms, our own beds at that night, and it would certainly promote it to other mothers, other low-risk mothers like me that were able to have really positive experiences.
It's with a bit of heavy heart that I'm speaking against the motion just now. I'd like to thank Shannon and Corey for bringing their positive birth experience to conference. I actually fully support the choice of women to birth at a place of their choice with appropriately trained personnel, but currently I don't think it's maybe the best choice to make due to the state of our NHS, and that's another debate. I'm a retired midwife, I'm a nurse, I was an advanced midwife practitioner, so I did some jobs that doctors would do, like forceps deliveries, von Treese deliveries, etc. I've worked in community settings, I've attended many home births, I've worked in labour wards, busy labour wards, I've attended people in community settings, community midwifery units, home births, and in labour wards and in theatres. There is no guarantee where you have your baby that everything will go well. There's certainly no guarantee going into hospital that you will have a normal, healthy baby at the end of it. In fact, I've dealt with mothers that have died, which is the most devastating thing that you can go through in midwifery. I've worked out in the middle of Australia with the Flying Doctor Service. I've attended births in creeks with Aboriginals who don't speak my language and sign language to get their baby delivered. We didn't know the gestation because if you asked them when their last period was, it was either before Christmas or after Christmas. So a lot of it was guesswork. I've delivered babies on planes coming back to Alice Springs, so I've had a good experience. I would always support home births, but the current system is not equitable, and people should be given the choice, and the current directions are that everyone is given the choice, but services have been streamlined so much that at first booking appointments, women are given so much information that home birth should be mentioned, it might be mentioned. It's most husbands that are freaked out about this to start with, so there certainly needs to be more education.
Even if a woman does not use her own egg, she is still related to the baby. She is still its mother. Her body nourishes and grows a baby for 9 months. Her womb determines the biological development, and their cells interchangeably mingle. Pregnancy is not passive. It forges a lifelong bond, an emotional and physical connection between mother and child that should never be denied. The only person a baby wants and needs at birth is the woman who carried him or her. All pregnant mothers know this. Hospitals bend over backwards to ensure mum gets skin-on-skin contact immediately after delivery. This regulates the baby's heartbeat and breathing. It is vital for the bonding process and vital to the child's well-being. Yet in surrogacy, the baby is intentionally taken away from its mother to prevent this bonding. Surrogacy creates women and children whose needs are somehow less than the wants of the purchasers. They are predominantly poorer women whose lives are deemed worth the risk, and children whose vital need to bond with the woman who carried them and gave them birth is somehow deemed unnecessary in their case, but vital to all of us. The magnified health risks for the mothers, the long-term consequences for the child, and the potential for exploitation of both means that surrogacy falls far below the standard of human rights we should expect for women and children. Conference, please support this motion.
Our record on tackling inequality is one we should be proud of, but that commitment must include speaking out against modern forms of exploitation like surrogacy. Let's be honest about what we're facing. Surrogacy, even under the guise of altruism, creates a market where women's bodies are rented and babies are bought. This is not progress, it's commodification. Overwhelmingly, poorer, younger women are drawn into this trade. Commercial surrogacy is illegal in the UK, yet through so-called expenses and international loopholes, the system is being abused. Parental orders are handed out with minimal safeguarding, background checks are lacking, and women's health is put at serious risk. Research shows surrogate mothers face 3 times the risk of severe pregnancy complications, and now we're seeing the Law Commission propose reforms that strip away even the limited rights women have left in these arrangements. Let me be crystal clear. In the words of campaigners, this is commercial surrogacy model, all but in name. Let me be crystal clear. Women's rights are non-negotiable. Their reproductive capacity is not a resource to be mined. My unbuyable bill is rooted in that principle that no woman should ever be bought, sold or exploited. It tackles male violence against women, political corruption and the systems that treat women as commodities. Babies are not commodities either. They are human beings with rights, not products created on demand. I was appalled to see the Scottish Government recently advertise for egg donors, offering cash, targeting young women and failing to mention any real risks. This is not empowerment. It's a failure of duty, of ethics and of care. Conference, let us be the party that defends every woman's right to dignity, safety and sovereignty of her own body. Let us say clearly, Scotland is not for sale, women are not for sale, babies are not for sale. Stand for human rights, stand for women, stand up for children, support this motion. Thank you.
I want to urge you today to vote against this motion. It is core. It seeks to dictate what women can and cannot do with our own bodies. And it's an approach that should deeply concern any party committed to women's rights. The motion paints surrogacy as inherently exploitative, but it ignores a crucial fact. Scotland already operates under some of the strictest surrogacy laws in the world, where commercial surrogacy is illegal. Payments beyond reasonable expenses are not allowed, and surrogacy agreements are not legally enforceable, meaning that no woman can be compelled to continue a pregnancy if she doesn't wish to. Parental orders must be granted by a court after birth, which does ensure legal oversight. And these protections exist precisely to prevent the exploitation that the motion warns about. To the argument about potential harm to mothers and babies, specifically in cases where children are separated from their birth mothers at the point of birth, I agree it does need careful consideration, but it's important to acknowledge that while surrogacy involves complex emotions and can present challenges, there is little evidence to suggest that surrogacy inherently harms mother or child when proper legal and ethical safeguards are in place. In fact, research on surrogacy suggests that most surrogate mothers have healthy, positive experiences, with strong emotional bonds formed between the surrogate and the child. Surrogates typically have the support of legal agreements, medical care, psychological counselling, and all of these things help manage emotional complexities of the process.
Like another topic that's coming up later, assisted dying, I used to think this is a great idea. In fact, 20 years ago, my daughter, who had a young age, we had a pact. If she couldn't have children, I would do that for her. Times have moved on, and I've looked into the issue of surrogacy a fair bit. You've got the really nice altruistic end, but even then, I know some families, a woman who had a child for her sister-in-law, she's now been cut off from that relationship. So even at the nicer end, it can be fraught with difficulties. But the more you look at the commercialisation of women's bodies, it's truly horrific. I mean, there's folk trafficked into this, their eggs are harvested, and ultimately, at the end of the day, although my heart goes out to people who can't have children, it must be a dreadful pain and a heartache. Ultimately, it's the right of that child. So to be born of a child where your egg, your mother, is not even regarded as being able to gestate that because they transplant it into another woman, thus reducing that contact, that bond. Anyway, we've had some fantastic speakers on that earlier.